video number 1. And basically how this is going to work is you're going to take your homework, you're going to listen to this video, and then you're going to complete the homework to the best of your ability and block an essay, and I'll explain all of this. So here's your flipped video tips. Watch the video before the designated class block, just look on your calendar. No excuses, watch the video on any device that allows access to the internet, Chromebook, whatever. Do any activities immediately after you watch the video while things are fresh in your mind, and bring your completed activity and any questions you might have to the next class, and you will take a quiz on this material. So here are the topics for review quiz number 1. The Age of Reason, which includes the scientific revolution and the Age of Enlightenment. Political revolutions like the French Revolution and the Latin American revolutions. Growing nationalism, Industrial Revolution, the Meiji Restoration or the Meiji era in Japan, and new imperialism by those industrialized European powers. This essay that you're going to block a little later looks at revolution in general, and you can see that there are choices here from ninth grade, like the Neolithic Revolution. You're not going to see choices from ninth grade on the test on June 5th. So basically what you're going to do is select 2 revolutions, describe the historical circumstances, what was going on, and discuss the political, economic, and or social effects of this revolution. Your best bets here are the French Revolution, Industrial Revolution, Russian, Chinese Cultural Revolution. Those are your best bets that I would go for. All right, let's do some review of the material. The scientific revolution is where this course really starts off with this idea of observation and experimentation. People like Descartes, Newton, Copernicus, Galileo started to use what they called empiricism. They could see it, they could mathematically prove it, and so they said there are natural laws of the universe, and they used the scientific method to prove it. And one of the biggest things was that the sun was the center of the universe, known as the heliocentric model, versus what the church said it was, the geocentric model, or the earth-centered model. Obviously, the heliocentric model was correct, and the use of the telescope changed it all. And it really was a revolution in using science and math. That led us to 4 Enlightenment thinkers that you have to know, who said, well, if there are natural laws of the universe, there are natural laws of man. John Locke of England said in his 2 treatises on government that every man deserves life, liberty, and property. Now later, Thomas Jefferson will take that and say life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, because he and all of the founding fathers of America had read Locke. They had read Montesquieu, Voltaire, and Rousseau. They had read their work and said, yes, that's what we're going to do. We're going to put the Enlightenment ideas into action. And that's why the Enlightenment is going to fully cause the American Revolution first, the French Revolutions, and then the Latin American Revolutions. So John Locke, Life, Liberty, and Property, in his 2 treatises on government. Baron de Montesquieu, a French baron, said, France needs to be more like England. Have a limited monarch, 3 branches of government, checks and balances, legislative, executive, and judicial branches. And he wrote a book called The Spirit of the Laws. Voltaire was not his real name, but that's his stage name, if you will, his writing name. And he said, look, I do not agree with what you have to say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. He believed in freedom of speech, but more importantly, he believed in freedom of belief, freedom of religion. And then Jean-Jacques Rousseau, sometimes known as the Crazy Swiss, said, we don't need a lot of rules. We can have direct democracy. We can live under something called the social contract, where everyone does the right thing because it's in their best interest to do the right thing. So these 4 men, among others, were the most influential in persuading the American colonists to revolt, and the French revolutionaries and the Latin American revolutionaries like Simón Bolívar and earlier Toussaint Louverture. These are all impacted by the Age of Reason. The French Revolution was caused, of course, by high taxes, social inequality of those 3 estates, the first estate being, of course, the clergy, the second estate, the nobles, and the third estate, everyone else, including the bourgeoisie, or the French middle class. It was also caused by Louis XVI and his wife Marie Antoinette, pictured right here, being very inept, unable to rule France and meet the needs of their people. And bread. There was a lack of food, they were hangry, there was a lack of hope that there would be food. Remember that the French Revolution lasts from 1789 to officially 1815 with the fall of Napoleon. There are many phases and many people. The most important thing you need to hold on to is that the first phase is actually the most moderate. It starts with the tennis court oath, then the storming of the Bastille, then the August decrees, and then the women marching on Versailles, demanding bread, and putting Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette under house arrest in Paris. It has the Declaration of the Rights of Man in it. Remember Olympia de Gouges? She wrote the Declaration of the Rights of Women. It should have ended the revolution once the Constitution was created, but unfortunately, France also has to fight Austria and Prussia because Austria and Prussia do not want the French Revolution to succeed because they fear that their people will revolt. And also, Marie Antoinette is Austrian. So then we lead us into the radical phase with the leader Maximilien Robespierre. Maximilien Robespierre says that there are enemies in France and enemies outside of France. He tells the French revolutionaries that everyone will join forces and fight for the revolution. They call it a levée en masse. And Robespierre says, we'll have a committee of public safety, which was neither a committee nor public nor safe. And it leads to the Reign of Terror, with an estimated 40,000 people losing their heads in this new humane device called the guillotine. After Robespierre and others who led the Jacobin radicals during the radical phase are killed themselves, we enter the Directory phase, which is a 5-man directory. It's called an oligarchy, a rule of the few. There's still so many problems going on. There's still shortages, there's still war. And throughout this revolution, a man named Napoleon Bonaparte is distinguishing himself as a general. And so he will wage a coup d'etat, which is a military takeover, overthrowing the Directory and establishing stability. He will have positive things that he will do, like regulating of banking, improving schools, increasing schools, conquering most of Europe. But he will also have defeats, like going into Russia in the winter, or at any time, but really going into Russia in the winter, having to retreat, losing over 400,000 men in that retreat, and then going into exile not once, but twice, and the first time, of course, coming out of exile, ruling for 100 days, being defeated at the Battle of Waterloo, and then being forced to exile on the island of St. Helena. Nationalism is growing also in Latin America, and that's part of the Latin American Revolution. Toussaint Louverture was a former slave in Haiti, and Haiti is right here, a small island in the Caribbean Sea. Toussaint Louverture is successful to a degree to try to get the Haitian people freedom. Probably one of the first slave revolts that we can see as successful. He dies before he sees a free Haiti, but he does start it. He says he plants the tree of Black Liberty. In South America, we have a Creole named Simon Bolivar. Creoles were the second in line of power in Latin America. The top were the Peninsulares, who were born in Spain on the Iberian Peninsula. The Creoles, like Simon Bolivar, were very similar to the bourgeoisie of France. They had education, they knew what they were missing out on, and that was privileges, and they wanted freedom. So Simon Bolivar, together with Jose de San Martin, they're going to work to liberate South America from Spain. Portugal will hold on to Brazil for a little bit, but by 1889, Brazil will be independent. In Mexico, we have a priest named Father Hidalgo, and then after him, Father Morelos, even though it's not in that order on the slide. And they both wanted to get rid of that social triangle that put the Peninsulares on top and the Creoles on the bottom and the Mestizos next and they wanted to get rid of it. And because they did, that threatened the Creoles who wanted to stay on top and they wanted to be in power. And so both Father Hidalgo and Father Morelos in Mexico will be assassinated in their attempts to free Mexico from Spain and free people from the chains of that social hierarchy. The Congress of Vienna meets after Napoleon is defeated, well, kind of during while he's being defeated, but basically, these are the major powers of Europe coming together and saying, this is what we want to do. We want to make sure that a Napoleon never comes to power again. And so it's England, it's Prussia, it's Austria, Russia, and France who meet and say, we're going to have a balance of power. We're going to shrink boundaries of France, and we're going to have legitimate monarchs on the thrones. And we're going to set something up called a Concert of Europe, which was an alliance system which was supposed to ensure this balance of power. Unfortunately, what the Congress of Vienna doesn't take into account is the immense power of nationalism, especially nationalism here in the German states and in the Italian states, because Germany and Italy were not united yet. But we will know that that will happen. In the Mexican Revolution from 1910 to 1930, there is a man named Porfirio Diaz, and he rules as a dictator. And because the system of hierarchy of social classes was there, Diaz could just do whatever he wanted. In 1910, he's ousted, and the heroes become a man named Emiliano Zapata, and he calls for land reform, and a man named Pancho Villa, and basically that ends with a man coming to power whose last name is Carranza, and he becomes the president in 1917, and they make a new constitution. But regardless of where you are in Latin America, the issue is always land reform and who has power and control. Global nationalism is big because Zionism is growing during this time, which is an idea of Jewish nationalism. And then in Italy, we have the sword, which is Garibaldi, pictured here in his red shirt army. Cavour, the brain who manipulates everyone. Mazzini, the heart, who writes about this idea of Italian nationalism. And King Victor Emmanuel II, who's the only Italian on the throne of any Italian city-state. So they're going to have to fight and unite and kick off the Austrians to finally be the first to unify. The Jews are going to have to wait to fulfill Zionism until after World War II. But Italy and Germany are able to unify their nationalism before World War II. And the most famous national hero, of course, is this guy with the pointy helmet, Otto von Bismarck, who said, you know what, I don't care about conservatives or liberals. What I care about is unification. And so he unified the German states through blood, war, and iron industry. And he fights 3 wars, one with the Danes, one with the Austrians, and one with the French. And when he fights with the French, there are people in Paris who are reduced to eating rats. And that's really going to cause the French to hate the Germans, and a little foreshadowing of what's going to happen when Germany invades again in World War I and again in World War II. But Bismarck is very successful in his Blood and Iron campaign. Germany is unified by 1871, and they become a leading power of the second wave of the Industrial Revolution, and they are able to militarize before World War I and have great military technology. Couple this with the Industrial Revolution that lasts from 1750 to 1850. England is the country where it begins, and it's because England had gone through the agricultural revolution and they had enough food, and the workers that they didn't need anymore because of the enclosure movement on the farms led to mass amounts of people going to the cities, which you know is the word urbanization. Why England? England also had a stable government, had money from its colonies and overseas ventures, had a lot of people, and especially people in the urban areas, had natural resources, had a strong navy, and location of an island trading nation. Industrial Revolution really is pushed further by Adam Smith's theories Adam Smith is a pro-capitalist thinker, Enlightenment thinker. He writes the book The Wealth of Nations, and in it he describes how supply and demand are natural identities of a capitalist market system. He believes in laissez-faire capitalism, where the government does not get involved in taxation of businesses, regulation of businesses. But what we see is by 1840, the workers are being exploited. And so that leads us to the last thinker of the Industrial Revolution, Karl Marx. And in 1848, Karl Marx and Frederick Engels pen a work that is probably the third most read book in the world. The first being the Bible, the second being Mao's Little Red Book, and the third being Karl Marx's book, The Communist Manifesto. And the Communist Manifesto predicts that the workers of Europe are going to combine their forces, unite, overthrow the bourgeoisie, the upper class and the elite and the rulers and the factory owners, and form a perfect society where the workers share all of the labor and all of the money. And so there's no rich, but there's no poor. Everybody has what they need. And that is in 1848. By 1917, we're going to see the Soviet Union trying out that theory, and we know that story doesn't end the way they think it's going to. But Karl Marx really is looking at the exploitation of workers during the Industrial Revolution. In Japan, they are going through a huge change. They start off as a feudal Tokugawa shogunate. They're isolated, they don't want anyone else, they are very self-centered, ethnocentric. Then Commodore Matthew Perry from America comes and he says, let's open trade. And the shogun says, no, I don't want to open trade with you. You smell, because he did. And so Perry says, I'll be back in a year with a battleship. And he does, but no fighting has to take place. The Japanese shogun makes a treaty with the Americans called the Treaty of Kanagawa, which opens up only 2 ports to the Americans. But it begins a whole new era for Japan called the Meiji era. And the motto is Western technology, Japanese thought. And that motto is so important because Western technology, the Japanese will take whatever the Westerners are using, but they'll stay Japanese. They'll stay themselves. And this picture represents that. They also are going to become very good at beating people militarily, other countries militarily. And so the first time they're going to do that is the Sino-Japanese War, where they defeat the Chinese. And then the second is going to be the Russo-Japanese War, where they defeat the Russians. And so they're not only going to modernize and industrialize, they are going to begin to dominate. And of course, what they lack are natural resources. And that's going to lead them to become an imperialistic power. So in fact, Japan is going to embody all 4 main causes. They're going to be militaristic. They're going to force alliances with neighboring Asian countries, especially Korea. They're going to be uber imperialistic to take natural resources, and they already start off nationalistic. If you just look at their motto, Japanese thought, that's very nationalistic. Europe is going to undergo a huge transformation as well because of industrializations. Industrial nations always need raw materials, markets for their goods, and cheap labor. And so during this time period, this belief starts to occur of Europeans believing in something called social Darwinism, which is a belief that Europeans are the best of the human race and the most fittest, and therefore should overtake other areas and use and abuse those areas for their economic benefit. The poem by Rudyard Kipling, who writes the Jungle Book, called White Man's Burden, describes that identity of Europeans as having to conquer others. Of course, England is really good at this conquering, and that's why the sun never sets on the British Empire. And they take over India at this time, and they call India Britain's crown jewel because India's location is great. They also can get tea and cotton and indigo and lots of cheap labor, and they're going to control India pretty harshly until the Sepoy Mutiny, which involves those gunpowder cartridges that were laden with pig fat or beef fat. Beef fat went against the Hindu belief that cows are sacred. Pig fat went against the Muslim belief that pigs are dirty animals that shouldn't be eaten, that are unholy. The Sepoy Mutiny is not successful in getting the English out of India, but it does allow for a change in how India is ruled. And so Britain starts to rule India not as a company anymore, but as a colony. Of course, Africa is divided by the Europeans by the Berlin Conference, and the Africans are not invited to that conference. And Otto von Bismarck is the one who leads the conference because it's in Berlin, Germany. And that sets up what we call the scramble for Africa. That's going to lead to countless amounts of problems for African people, mainly that tribal boundaries, ethnic identities are not upheld, exploitation of people's labor and the land. Of course, in China, China is not divided like Africa, but it is divided into spheres of influence after the British defeat the Chinese in the Opium Wars. And opium, as you know, is a drug, and the English were able to smuggle that drug into China. Once the Chinese try to defeat the English in the Opium Wars, they lose. And so you can see on this map, you have a British sphere of influence. Those are special trading areas. You have in yellow the French sphere of influence. Japan gets a sphere of influence. Germany gets a sphere of influence. Russia gets a sphere of influence. China loses its ability to really control its own destiny. The Boxer Rebellion, like the Sepoy Mutiny, is an attempt to get the foreigners out of China, but it's a small group, and they do not have the backing of the Chinese government. They yell, "Foreign devils, get out," but it is not successful, and the Boxer Rebellion is put down. This is what it eventually looks like. The Europeans will rule the world. All of those colors represent all of the areas that they control until pretty much the 1950s and 60s when things begin to change. All right, let's look at some practice. The writers and philosophers of the Enlightenment believed that government decisions should be based on fundamental religious beliefs, the concept of divine right of kings, laws of nature and reason, traditional values. And the answer, of course, is laws of nature and reason. A primary cause of the French Revolution in 1799 was the increasing dissatisfaction of the Third Estate, rise of power of Napoleon Bonaparte, actions of Prince von Metternich, and execution of Louis XVI. The answer, of course, is increasing dissatisfaction of the Third Estate. Remember, Abbé Sieyès says, what is the Third Estate? Everything. What has it been? Nothing. What does it want to be? Something. In a number of European countries in the 1800s, which situation occurred as a result of the influence of the French Revolution? Was it increase in religious conflict, rise of nationalistic movements, decentralization of government power, or economic depression? Always go with nationalism. Remember, those four main causes are growing. During the early 1800s, which was a major influence on the struggles for political independence in Latin America? Poor conditions in urban centers, the American and French Revolution, the desire of the Roman Catholic Church in Latin America to escape European control, demands by Latin American workers to own their own factories. You're always going to go with the American and French revolutions inspiring the Latin American revolutions. Which term refers to the Jewish movement to establish a homeland in Palestine? We're going to talk more about this in review number 4, but it is starting here with Zionism in the 1800s. The theory of laissez-faire capitalism advocates by Adam Smith government control of the economy, non-involvement of the government in the economy, government regulation of big business, or government sponsorship of labor unions. Of course, it's non-involvement. It means to let go, hands off. An important result of the Industrial Revolution was the concentration of workers in urban areas, increased desire of the wealthy class to share its power, formation of powerful craft guilds, or control of agriculture production by governments. Of course, the answer is 1, which means urbanization. In Japan, the period of Meiji Restoration was primarily characterized by strict isolation, feudal government, religious revival, reform, and modernization. Modern Meiji, M and M, modern Meiji. Russia in the 1700s and Japan in the 1800s were similar in that both countries began the process of modernization after a long period of isolation, developed democratic governments after years under absolute monarchies, refused to accept Western technological ideas, adopted socialist economic systems after capitalism had failed. The answer, of course, is modernization. Whenever you're looking at Japan, 1800s, Meiji, modern. The Treaty of Tordesillas concerning Latin America, the Berlin Conference concerning Africa were similar in that each agreement provided for self-government by native peoples, declared in these areas monarchs ruled by divine right, divided an area into European-controlled segments, suppressed revolts by native peoples against European imperialists. Of course, it's 3. The Boxer Rebellion of the early 20th century was an attempt to eliminate poverty among Chinese peasants, bring Western-style democracy to China, restore trade between China and European nations, or remove foreign influences from China. Foreign devils, get out. The theme of changing revolution. You're going to select 2 revolutions if you did this theme. You're going to block it on your homework right now. Notice the choices: French Revolution, Haitian, Industrial, Russian, Mexican, Chinese Cultural Revolution, and the Green Revolution in agriculture, which produces more food. You're going to select 2. Describe the causes and the political, economic, and social effects. So this is how you're going to block every essay. You're going to look at that, and you're going to make a chart on your paper or on an additional piece of paper. You're going to pick 2 revolutions from the list, and then for historical circumstances, what was occurring before the revolution? What were the causes? Why were people so dissatisfied? You're looking for key vocabulary, key people, key ideas. What changed? What didn't change, too? You can talk about that, okay? So that's how you're going to block it. You're going to open this up and look at it. So again, when you go back to this, you're looking at which topic you feel you could write the most about, okay? All right, thanks for joining me. See you later.